Princess Aria began her day the way she always did, with calm footsteps echoing across the polished marble floors of the royal palace. Every morning, a soft golden light filtered through the tall windows, turning the long hallways warm and peaceful. The palace staff moved quietly around her, each person trained to keep perfect order, so the morning routine flowed like a gentle river. Aria liked things this way, steady, predictable, and dignified. She believed that order protected the kingdom, and she followed palace rules as closely as she followed her own heartbeat. Her reputation for being disciplined had spread across the kingdom. When people spoke of her, they always mentioned her manners, her posture, or the way she kept her head held high. She had been raised to understand that every step she took represented the royal family. For Aria, rules were not restrictions. They were the invisible threads that held everything together. But despite this well-organized world, a new presence had quietly begun to disrupt the rhythm. Lady Eveline, the king's newly appointed consort. Eveline had been raised far from the capital, in a peaceful coastal region where people lived simply and warmly, without layers of complex tradition. When she arrived at the palace months earlier, she thought the new environment would feel exciting. Instead, she discovered that almost everything she did was being watched. Every gesture, every word, even the way she stood, held meaning here. Aria noticed Eveline's struggles early on. The consort tried very hard to follow the palace rules, but she did not always understand them. Sometimes, she bowed too quickly. Sometimes too slowly. Sometimes she walked too close to the princess, and other times too far. Aria's advisors whispered that Eveline should be corrected more firmly, but Aria chose patience, even if it made her seem distant. Captain Rowan, the royal guard in charge of ceremony and discipline, had fewer gentle thoughts. Rowan knew every rule by heart, and he believed it was his duty to make sure everyone else did too. Whenever he walked through the palace, his boots clicked loudly, a reminder of his strict nature. His loyalty to Princess Aria was unquestionable, and he would never allow anyone, especially a newcomer, to disrespect protocol. The morning that changed everything began quietly, just like any other. Aria stepped out of her private chambers, with the poise of someone trained since childhood to move gracefully. 2 guards opened the door for her, and she nodded politely before gliding down the hallway. Captain Rowan followed a few steps behind, keeping a careful eye on her surroundings. Every day, Aria took a walk through the inner courtyard before attending meetings. She liked the soft breeze that played with the long leaves of the palace gardens. The courtyard was filled with tall archways and soft green plants that made the space feel alive yet peaceful. Aria often said that the courtyard helped her prepare her mind for the responsibilities of the day. Lady Eveline had been invited to join this morning's walk. Aria's advisors felt the princess and the consort needed to appear together more often. They hoped people would see harmony between them. Eveline arrived early, eager not to disappoint anyone. She wore a pastel-colored gown with simple embroidery, far less decorated than what most nobles wore, but elegant in its own way. When Aria entered the courtyard, Eveline straightened her back and lowered her eyes gently, trying to show respect. Aria offered a small nod in return, a gesture polite enough for others to witness, but not warm enough to make Eveline feel fully welcome. Still, it was more acknowledgement than usual, and Eveline felt a spark of hope. They walked side by side, with Rowan a few steps behind. The courtiers nearby watched them closely. Every move the princess made held meaning. Every reaction Eveline gave could start new conversations among the palace staff. The air was filled with quiet whispers, but no one dared speak loudly. Eveline's mind wandered as they moved through the courtyard. She noticed small things, flowers just beginning to bloom, sunlight dancing on the palace walls, and Aria's calm expression. She wanted to ask a question about the tour the princess would lead later that afternoon, but she hesitated, unsure if speaking would break any rules. Aria, on the other hand, was deep in thought about her agenda for the day. She had a long list of meetings, and she needed to maintain her calm focus. Protocol, rules, expectations, everything had a place in her schedule. It was then, in the middle of those quiet thoughts, that Eveline suddenly became aware that Aria had slowed her steps. Wanting to match the pace, Eveline stepped closer. Her hand moved instinctively, almost without thinking, and for a brief moment, her fingers brushed against Aria's arm. The touch was light, barely noticeable in most situations, but in the palace, even the smallest gesture held weight. The few courtiers walking nearby gasped softly. A guard's hand hovered near his chest as if he expected a dramatic reaction. Eveline froze. Her heart skipped, and her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She had never meant to disrespect the princess. It was simply an innocent mistake, a reflex born from her friendly upbringing. Not palace etiquette. She quickly pulled her hand back, her breath catching in her throat. Aria stopped walking. The princess turned her head with practiced calm. But her eyes widened just a little, just enough for those near her to understand she was surprised. No one touched Princess Aria without permission, not even the king did so casually. Captain Rowan reacted instantly. His training told him that such a moment could become a breach of royal dignity if not handled properly. He stepped forward, his expression serious but respectful. It was in this suspended moment, Eveline nervous, courtiers watching, Rowan ready to enforce order, that the tone of the day changed. Because while Eveline's accidental touch had startled the princess, the true tension came from what everyone expected would happen next. Rumors had already been floating through the palace for weeks. Some said Eveline did not understand royal life. Others whispered that Aria was growing tired of correcting her. The courtiers saw this tiny mistake as confirmation of Eveline's unfamiliarity, and they watched for Aria's reaction as if it were a grand performance. In truth, Aria was not angry. She was simply surprised. She had spent so many years living within exact rules that she wasn't used to casual gestures. For Eveline, who came from a warmer, friendlier environment, a light touch seemed harmless. But for Aria, it carried meaning, tradition, and weight. Eveline quickly looked down, struggling to find the right words. She wanted to apologize, yet she didn't know if speaking would make things worse. Her mind raced with worry. Her single thought was clear. She had made a mistake, and she feared she had embarrassed the princess. The courtyard felt still, as though even the wind paused to listen. Captain Rowan's eyes moved from Aria to Eveline. His sense of duty sharpened. His purpose was clear: restore order. But Aria lifted one hand slightly, and though she said nothing yet, that small movement showed she was already deciding how to handle the moment. The world did not know it, but that simple morning walk, the light touch, the sharp breath, the quiet pause would soon become the beginning of a subtle change between them, one that no rulebook had prepared them for. The soft echo of the accidental touch still lingered in the air long after Eveline's hand had pulled away. The courtyard, usually filled with the sound of gentle footsteps and rustling leaves, felt strangely silent. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-song, as if the entire palace was holding its breath at the same time. Eveline stood frozen, her fingers curled tightly into her palm, wishing she could turn back time just a few seconds. She had never touched royalty before, not in such a casual way, and certainly not the princess herself. In her home by the coast, people often placed a hand on someone's shoulder or arm to get their attention. It was normal, warm, and familiar. But this palace was different. Here, every simple action carried layers of meaning. Eveline felt as though she had stepped into a world where one wrong movement could be misunderstood, and now she feared she had proven everyone's worries to be true. Princess Aria remained perfectly still. Her posture was calm, her expression composed, but her eyes told a different story. They held a flicker of surprise, not anger, not offense, only a moment of confusion, as though someone had gently tapped the glass of a quiet lake. Aria had lived in a world built on rules and decorum. Her days followed a strict pattern, and she had long learned to keep emotional reactions hidden. Even so, she could not deny that Eveline's sudden touch had caught her completely off guard. Captain Rowan, always alert, stepped forward without hesitation. His boots clicked firmly against the stone pathway, the sound breaking the heavy silence. He believed deeply in the rituals of the palace, in the delicate structure that kept the royal family safe and respected. To him, this incident was not small. It was a moment that required order to be restored immediately. Eveline didn't know where to look. Her eyes darted from the princess's calm face to Rowan's serious expression, then to the courtiers who were pretending not to stare. Her heart thudded loudly in her chest, each beat reminding her how out of place she felt. She wished she could explain that the touch had been accidental, innocent, and meant no disrespect. But her throat felt tight, and the words wouldn't come. A quiet breeze picked up, brushing gently across the courtyard and lifting the edges of Eveline's gown. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself that she had made mistakes before and survived them. But this one felt different. This one had happened in front of so many watching eyes. Aria studied Eveline carefully. She noticed the consort's trembling hands and the worry clouding her eyes. Aria was not unkind by nature. She simply lived with the understanding that her every action set an example for the kingdom. She wondered, for a brief moment, if Eveline truly understood the world she had stepped into. Before Aria could say anything, Captain Rowan spoke. His voice was firm but respectful, carrying the tone of a guard who took his duties seriously. "Lady Eveline," he said slowly, "you must show respect to the princess. Please offer your salute at once." His intention was not to embarrass her. Rowan sincerely believed that guiding Eveline back into proper etiquette would calm everyone's nerves, including the princess's. But the command only made Eveline feel smaller. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes lowered even further, and she felt the weight of the moment grow heavier. Aria turned her gaze to Rowan. His loyalty was undeniable, but she sensed that he was handling the situation out of habit, not understanding. This was not a moment for correction. It was a moment for clarity. Aria gently raised her hand, a silent signal for him to stop. Rowan stepped back immediately, surprised but obedient. The courtiers exchanged glances. It was rare for the princess to interrupt her guard so directly, especially during a moment that clearly called for protocol. But Aria was already thinking past the rules. She was thinking about Eveline, the woman who had come from a different world, who was trying so hard to fit into a place where she felt watched and judged. Eveline swallowed hard, unsure whether she was supposed to speak, move, or stand still. The uncertainty pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. She had not meant to cause trouble. All she had wanted was to keep up with Aria's pace and ask a simple question about the afternoon schedule. She had not realized how closely she had stepped beside the princess until it was too late. Aria finally broke the silence. "Lady Eveline," she said softly, her voice steady and controlled. "Are you all right?" Eveline's head lifted slightly, her eyes searching the princess's face for signs of displeasure. But Aria's expression remained calm, almost gentle. There was no anger in her voice, no harshness, only a quiet question. I'm very sorry," Eveline stammered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to. I didn't realize." She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Each word felt clumsy, uncertain. Her breath caught as she waited for the princess's response. Aria nodded slowly. "I understand," she replied. "It was an accident." Those words fell like warm sunlight on Eveline's worry-filled heart. She felt her shoulders relax just a little. She had feared a formal reprimand or a public correction, but Aria had chosen to address the moment with calm understanding rather than strict discipline. Still, the courtiers around them exchanged whispers. They had expected something dramatic, a stern reminder of the rules, or a sharp command for Eveline to apologize formally. Instead, the princess had responded with patience. This small act alone caused more surprise than the accidental touch itself. Rowan's brows furrowed, but he kept silent. He trusted the princess, even when he did not fully understand her choices. Eveline tried to gather her thoughts. "I should have been more careful," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," Aria said, though in truth she had been startled. But she didn't want Eveline to carry unnecessary guilt. "Just be mindful of space. That is all." Eveline nodded quickly, relief washing over her like cool water. The tension in the courtyard slowly began to fade. Servants resumed their quiet tasks, though their eyes lingered with curiosity. The moment had been small, but it held the weight of palace expectations. They knew it would become the subject of quiet conversation later, retold with every tiny detail. The walk resumed, though the atmosphere had changed. Aria kept a calm pace, allowing Eveline to walk beside her at a comfortable distance. Rowan followed closely, observing everything as he always did. But now, with a thoughtful expression, Eveline's mind buzzed with emotions, relief, embarrassment, gratitude, and a renewed determination. She wanted to learn. She wanted to belong, and most importantly, she wanted to show the princess that she could adapt without losing herself. As for Aria, she found herself thinking about Eveline in a way she hadn't before. She realized that the consort was not disrespectful, only unfamiliar. And perhaps, Aria thought, the palace could be a warmer place if she allowed a little more room for understanding. The accidental touch, innocent as it was, had opened a small door between them, a door Aria had never expected to see. Captain Rowan's voice still echoed in Eveline's mind long after he had stepped back. His words had been firm, almost too firm, and even though the princess had stopped him, Eveline felt their weight. She kept replaying them as she walked beside Aria, trying to hide the embarrassment still warming her cheeks. Every few steps she glanced at the princess, hoping that Aria had already forgotten the moment or at least forgiven it completely. But Aria had not forgotten at all. She felt the shift in the air as clearly as the breeze that brushed past them. She knew Rowan had acted out of duty, but she also knew Eveline was not a person who responded well to sharp instructions. Aria had learned, in their short time together, that Eveline carried her emotions close to the surface. A stern voice did not simply fade for her. It lingered, creating doubts where none were meant to exist. The path through the courtyard curved near a line of tall columns, each decorated with soft carvings that caught the morning light. Aria slowed her pace, not wanting Eveline to feel rushed as she collected her thoughts. Rowan noticed the change and adjusted his position behind them, allowing a respectful distance so the two women could move more comfortably. Even with Aria's calm manner, Eveline still felt the eyes of the palace on her. Servants paused in their tasks to steal quick glances. Courtiers pretended to admire the flowers while secretly watching every step. Eveline wished she could disappear into the shadows of the columns, if only for a moment. Finally, Aria spoke in her steady, low voice. "Do not let what happened trouble you." Eveline looked up quickly, surprised that the princess had sensed her worry so easily. "I'm trying," she said softly, "but I feel like I made everything harder." Aria shook her head gently. "You did not. Everyone adjusts at their own pace." Eveline wanted to believe that. She wanted to hold on to Aria's kindness. But she knew the palace did not move slowly for anyone. It was a place with expectations that existed long before she arrived, and would remain long after she left. She feared she was the only one who didn't know how to move within those expectations. As they walked, a pair of young court attendants entered the courtyard carrying scrolls. When they noticed the princess, they bowed quickly and stepped aside. Eveline watched the way they moved, the careful bending of their heads, the soft placement of their hands over their hearts. Everything was polished, perfect, and practiced. It made her wonder if she would ever reach that level of grace. Rowan kept his eyes on the attendants until they had gone. His sense of duty was woven into every fiber of his being. He lived by the belief that the royal household was safest when everyone followed the rules exactly. Even a small breach, like an accidental touch, made him feel uneasy. He could not help but replay his own reaction as well. Had he been too strict? Had he embarrassed the princess by speaking so quickly? But Rowan pushed these thoughts away. His role was not to question his choices. It was to protect Princess Aria and guide those around her. Still, he noticed the softness in Aria's expression whenever she looked at Eveline. He had never seen her look at anyone that way, not even toward other nobles who had known her for years. Something new was happening, and Rowan was unsure whether to welcome it or guard against it. Eveline, meanwhile, gathered her courage and decided to speak again. "Princess," she said carefully, "I truly want to understand everything here. I don't want to make mistakes." Aria glanced at her with quiet curiosity. Understanding takes time, she replied. Mistakes are simply steps on that path. Evelyn appreciated the princess's calm tone, but she still felt a knot inside her chest. It's just, I want to honor the role I've been given. Everyone expects me to fit perfectly into the palace. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to solve a puzzle without knowing what the picture is supposed to be. Aria slowed until they reached a shaded corner of the courtyard, where tall plants swayed gently. You're not alone in that feeling, she said. Even I still learn new things every day. Evelyn blinked, surprised. You? Aria let out a soft breath, not quite a laugh but close. The palace is larger than all of us. It teaches constantly. We simply choose how to respond. Those words eased something inside Evelyn. It was comforting to know that even someone as polished as Princess Aria wasn't perfect. Even if she appeared so, Evelyn felt her confidence beginning to return, like a bird slowly finding its wings again. But the quiet moment was soon interrupted when a group of courtiers passed through the courtyard on their way to the meeting hall. They bowed deeply to Aria and paused, waiting for her to pass. Rowan stiffened immediately, ready to return to formal posture. Evelyn straightened too, remembering the importance of appearances. As they moved past the courtiers, Evelyn overheard a whispered comment, soft but clear enough to catch. She's still learning, one courtier murmured to another. The princess is patient, but patience has limits. Evelyn pretended not to hear, but her stomach tightened. She wondered if Aria had heard too. She didn't dare look. Once the courtiers were out of sight, Rowan leaned forward slightly, speaking with respectful caution. Princess, may I advise? Aria raised a hand again, stopping him before he could continue. Rowan fell silent, though his concern remained visible in the small crease between his brows. Evelyn sensed tension building again, and she wished she could somehow explain herself better to Rowan, to the courtiers, to the whole palace. She felt like everyone saw her mistakes more clearly than her efforts. Aria turned toward Evelyn, her voice quieter but still steady. Do not let others define your journey, she said. Your place here was not given lightly. Evelyn nodded, though her throat felt tight. I just want to be someone you can trust. You already are, Aria replied, surprising her. Those words felt warm, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Evelyn let herself breathe more fully, letting go of some of the tension she had been holding onto since the accidental touch. Rowan watched them with a mix of confusion and caution. He respected Evelyn, but he had never expected the princess to show her so much understanding. It made him question whether he had misjudged the consort's presence in the palace. As they continued walking, the atmosphere slowly softened. Evelyn's steps grew steadier. Aria's expression grew more thoughtful. Rowan's watchful gaze eased, though only slightly, but despite the return to calm, the moment that had just passed left an imprint on all three of them. For Evelyn, it was a reminder of how delicate the palace world could be, and how deeply she wanted to learn it. For Rowan, it was a warning that change might be coming, even if he wasn't ready for it. For Aria, it was the beginning of something she had never expected. A realization that maybe rules alone were not enough to build true harmony. What none of them knew was that this small moment, the guard's intervention, Evelyn's apology, Aria's gentle response was only the beginning of the shift that would soon reshape their connection in ways none of them could yet imagine. The atmosphere in the courtyard changed in a quiet but noticeable way after Princess Aria raised her hand to stop Captain Rowan. It was a simple gesture, almost gentle, yet it carried an authority that made everyone pause. Rowan stepped back respectfully, though he could not hide the surprise in his eyes. He had expected to take control of the moment, to guide the consort through the proper actions. But Aria had interrupted him without even saying a word. Evelyn noticed the surprise in Rowan's face and felt a pinch of guilt. She hadn't meant to cause trouble for him either. He was only trying to do his job, and she respected that. Still, she was grateful that Aria had spoken for her. The princess's calm words had felt like a warm hand guiding her through a confusing moment. Aria walked forward, giving Evelyn a soft nod, signaling that they should continue the morning path. Eveline followed closely, not too close this time, and Rowan walked behind them with a posture that suggested he was both thoughtful and alert. The courtyard opened into a wider garden filled with delicate flowers. Their colors shifted like painted brushstrokes: pink, white, gold, lavender, and the scent was light and refreshing. Beaumont, the palace gardener, was trimming a rosebush nearby. He bowed deeply when he saw the princess and stepped back so she could pass. Aria paused to admire the flowers for a moment. "Beaumont has done well this season," she said quietly, almost to herself. Eveline smiled gently. "They're beautiful." The courtyard at my home had bright flowers too, but nothing this carefully arranged. Aria looked at her with curiosity. "What were they like?" Eveline brightened at the question. "They grew naturally, spreading where they wished. My mother always believed flowers chose their own places." Aria's lips curved slightly. "A charming idea." They began walking again. The path led toward a stone bridge that crossed a small pond filled with clear water. The surface reflected the sky like a mirror, broken only by the gentle ripples of fish swimming below. The peaceful surroundings made Eveline feel her heartbeat settle. She found comfort in the natural beauty, things that didn't judge, whisper, or expect perfection. But as they crossed the bridge, a few courtiers arrived from the opposite side. They bowed deeply, greeting Aria with practiced elegance. Their eyes flickered to Eveline for only a second before they returned to polite smiles. Still, Eveline felt their curiosity. She wondered if they were silently discussing her mistake, not the touch itself, but the attention it had drawn. Aria sensed the tension too. She slowed her steps to give the courtiers room to pass without being rushed. The moment was small, but Eveline noticed it. It was as if the princess had created a small shield of calm around her. When the courtiers had gone, Eveline exhaled quietly. Aria glanced at her, noticing the shift in her mood. "You are thinking too much," Aria said gently. "I can't help it," Eveline admitted. "Every time someone looks at me, I wonder what they think." Aria stopped walking. "You do not need to prove yourself to everyone." Eveline lowered her eyes. "Maybe not. But I want to prove myself to you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She felt her face warm, worried she had spoken too boldly. But Aria did not frown or step back. Instead, she studied Eveline with a thoughtful expression, as if trying to understand the deeper meaning behind her words. "I see your efforts," Aria said finally. "I see more than you realize." Eveline felt her heart lighten again. "Thank you." Rowan watched the exchange from a few steps behind. He did not interrupt, but his mind was busy. He had served the princess for years. He knew her rhythms, her habits, her expectations. She rarely opened conversations with anyone outside her inner circle. She rarely offered gentle reassurance. Yet here she was, speaking to Eveline with a patience and warmth that seemed unusual for her. Rowan didn't feel troubled by this change, only unsure. He wanted to protect the princess from misunderstanding or disappointment. Aria was strong, but she lived with expectations heavier than any armor. He didn't want Eveline, kind as she was, to unknowingly shake the structure Aria depended on. As the group walked along the garden's outer path, they reached a quiet corner where a tall stone fountain stood. Water streamed softly down its sides, filling the area with a calming sound. Aria stopped there and turned to Eveline, as if she had been waiting for the right moment. "Lady Eveline," she said gently, "there is something you should understand. In the palace, rules exist because so many eyes are always watching. But rules are not meant to make you feel afraid." Eveline listened closely. "They are meant to keep harmony," Aria continued. "To help everyone move together." Eveline nodded. "I want to learn them, truly. But sometimes I feel like I'm trying to catch up to a path that keeps moving ahead of me." Aria's gaze softened. "Then walk beside me. Not behind, not ahead, beside." Eveline's breath caught for a moment. She wasn't sure if Aria meant it symbolically or literally. But either way, the words felt kind. Unexpectedly kind. Before she could respond, Rowan stepped forward slightly. careful not to interrupt, but clearly concerned. "Princess," he said respectfully. "May I speak?" Aria nodded. Rowan chose his words carefully. "There are expectations you must uphold. If others see too much leniency, they may misunderstand your intentions." Aria met his gaze with quiet clarity. "I appreciate your concern, Captain. But understanding is not weakness." Rowan lowered his eyes. "Of course, Princess." Eveline watched the exchange with a small ache in her chest. She didn't want to be the reason Rowan worried, or the reason Aria had to defend her choices. She felt caught between trying to learn the palace rules and trying not to disrupt them. Aria seemed to sense Eveline's thoughts again. "Do not worry," she said softly. "Every bond is tested by moments like this." "Bond?" Eveline repeated, surprised. Aria looked away for a moment, as if organizing her thoughts. "Yes. Anyone who shares the same path creates a bond, even if it begins quietly." A soft breeze passed through the garden, rustling the leaves above them. Eveline felt warmth spread through her heart. Not from sunlight, but from Aria's words. A bond. The idea was gentle, comforting, and meaningful in a way she had not expected. They continued their walk, and for the first time that morning, Eveline did not overthink her steps. She didn't stare at the ground or count the distance between herself and the princess. She simply walked calm, steady, and present. The palace walls still surrounded them. The courtiers still whispered from time to time. Rowan still watched carefully. But something had changed within Eveline. And something subtle had changed within Aria as well. The simple moment had turned into something deeper. Aria had taken control not through rules, but through understanding. Eveline had gained confidence not through perfect behavior, but through being seen and accepted. And Rowan, though cautious, could not deny that something genuine was forming between the princess and the consort, something quiet, yet strong. The morning walk ended with a sense of balance that none of them had expected. What began as a tense moment had gently transformed into the beginning of trust. But the day was not over, and the palace had a way of testing new beginnings. The rest of the day moved quietly, but the small change in the courtyard lingered like a soft echo around the palace halls. Princess Aria returned to her duties with her usual grace, yet something in her expression had shifted. Those who worked close to her noticed it first. Her steps felt lighter, her tone seemed gentler. Even the way she spoke to her advisors carried a new softness. No one could explain it, and no one dared ask. But the morning moment with Eveline had stayed with her in a way she hadn't expected. Eveline, too, felt different as she walked through the palace corridors. She had begun the day feeling embarrassed and unsure, worried she was out of place. But Aria's kindness had warmed her deeply. It made her want to try even harder. Instead of shrinking from the whispers or glances of the courtiers, she held her head a little higher, moving with more care, but also more dignity. Later that afternoon, Eveline was invited to a small meeting with the royal advisors. They wanted her to understand more about the responsibilities she would face in the coming months. Normally, such meetings made her nervous, but today, she felt a calmness she hadn't known before. She reminded herself of Aria's words. "Walk beside me. Not behind. Not ahead. Beside." The meeting lasted nearly an hour. Eveline listened to every word, took notes carefully, and asked polite questions when she needed clarity. The advisors exchanged surprised glances. They had expected her to remain quiet, shy, or uncertain. Instead, she carried herself with a gentle confidence, still humble, still learning, but more grounded than before. Meanwhile, Princess Aria finished her scheduled meetings and made her way to the main hall. Captain Rowan followed a few steps behind, as always. But today, he was quieter than usual. His thoughts kept circling the morning's events. He respected the princess deeply, and he wanted what was best for her. But he also sensed that something was changing, a shift in Aria's heart or perspective that he had not seen before. When they reached the end of the hall, Aria paused. "Captain Rowan," she said softly. He straightened. "Yes, princess? You seemed troubled earlier." Rowan hesitated. He had always been honest with her, and she valued his truth. But he also knew he had to speak carefully. "I only want to protect you," he said finally. "I am responsible for your comfort and your safety. When rules are ignored or misunderstood, it can create confusion." Aria met his eyes with calm understanding. "Your loyalty is not in question. You protect me well. But every person learns differently. And Eveline needs time." Rowan bowed his head slightly. "I understand." But Aria could still sense the concern in him. She didn't expect Rowan to change suddenly. Nor did she want him to. His firmness kept the palace steady. Still, she hoped he would one day see Eveline as she had begun to see her, not as someone who might disrupt the order, but as someone who might bring a gentle balance the palace had long needed. As the afternoon sun began to lower and the soft golden glow returned to the courtyard, Aria decided to take one last walk before evening preparations. It was a quiet habit she had kept since childhood, a moment to clear her mind and breathe freely. She stepped outside, expecting to walk alone, but found Eveline near the far edge of the courtyard, speaking quietly with Beaumont, the gardener. Eveline noticed the princess immediately, and smiled with a mixture of surprise and warmth. Beaumont bowed and excused himself. Leaving the two women alone in the peaceful garden, Aria approached her. "I see you've discovered Beaumont's favorite place." Eveline laughed softly. "He was telling me how each flower here has its own story. I didn't know gardens could hold so many memories." "Everything in the palace holds memories," Aria said. "Some light, some heavy." Eveline nodded. "I'm still learning how to understand all of them." Aria stepped closer, her tone gentle. "And you are doing well." Eveline's face brightened, but she lowered her gaze shyly. "Thank you for saying that." They walked slowly along the garden path, surrounded by soft colors and rustling leaves. Neither of them spoke for several moments, yet the silence felt comfortable. It felt warm, like a peaceful morning that didn't need words to be meaningful. Finally, Eveline broke the silence with a quiet confession. "Earlier today, when I touched your arm, I was afraid it would change how you saw me." "It did," Aria replied honestly. Eveline's heart fluttered nervously. "In a bad way?" Aria shook her head. "In a real way. It reminded me that people are not meant to be perfect. Not even me. And that sometimes, a moment of surprise can show us something we didn't expect." Eveline looked at her with open curiosity. "What did it show you?" Aria paused as they reached the stone fountain again. The water shimmered like a small pool of sunlight. "It showed me that you are sincere," she said gently. "And sincerity can teach more than rules." Eveline felt the words settle in her heart like soft feathers. She had been searching for a place in the palace, a place where she could belong without feeling like a mistake waiting to happen. And now, hearing Aria say such things made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt since leaving her coastal home. "You've been very kind to me," Eveline said quietly. "More than I expected." Aria looked at her with soft eyes. "Kindness is not something I often express easily. But you make it effortless." Eveline felt a warm rush of emotion but kept her composure. "I'm glad." They stood by the fountain for a moment, the peaceful sound of water flowing between them. It was not a dramatic moment, not a grand gesture. Yet it held a quiet significance, something delicate and growing. Rowan approached from a distance, stopping respectfully before interrupting. "Princess," he said softly, "your evening meeting begins shortly." Aria nodded. "Thank you, Captain." Eveline stepped back, not wanting to keep the princess from her duties. "I should let you go," she said. Aria hesitated for just a moment, as if unwilling to leave the gentle calm they had found. "We will continue our walk another day," she said softly. Eveline smiled. "I'd like that." Aria turned to leave, Rowan walking behind her. But before she stepped away completely, Aria paused and glanced back at Eveline. It was a small gesture, but it spoke more than words, a quiet acknowledgement of the understanding formed between them. Eveline watched the princess disappear into the hallway, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The morning's accident, once a moment of embarrassment, had become the beginning of something better, something meaningful, something quietly promising. The whispers of the courtiers no longer felt heavy. The rules no longer felt like chains. And the palace, once overwhelming, now felt like a place where she might truly find her place. What began with an innocent mistake had transformed into a gentle connection that neither of them had planned, but both of them felt. And so, a new chapter unfolded in the palace, shaped not by perfection, but by patience, understanding, and a bond slowly forming in the quiet spaces between them.